Eleanor Grayson's hands, gnarled yet steady, moved with a rhythm born of decades. The needle of her old singer's sewing machine hummed softly, stitching delicate ivory fabric under the glow of a single lamp. At 72, her eyes weren't what they used to be, but her fingers knew every thread, every seam, as if they carried the memory of a lifetime spent creating. The dress on her work table wasn't just fabric, it was a promise, a bridge to a moment she'd been chasing for years. Her small cottage in Willow Creek smelled of lavender and old wood, a sanctuary of memories. Photographs lined the walls, her late husband, Thomas, laughing in a field, her daughter, Clara, at 5, twirling in a dress Eleanor had made, and then Clara at 16, sullen, before she left home without a word. The silence that followed had stretched across 20 years, a chasm Eleanor couldn't cross. Until now. The letter had arrived 3 months ago, trembling in her hands like a fragile bird. Mama, I'm getting married. I want you there. I want your dress. Eleanor's heart had leapt and shattered in the same breath. Clara, her Clara, was reaching out. The request for a dress felt like an olive branch, delicate but heavy with meaning. Eleanor had poured herself into the work, sketching designs late into the night, choosing silk that shimmered like moonlight, embroidering tiny roses along the hem, Clara's favorite flower. Each stitch was a prayer, a hope to mend what time had torn apart. The dress was nearly finished now, its bodice intricate with lace, its train flowing like a soft river. Eleanor paused, her hands hovering over the fabric. She imagined Clara walking down the aisle, radiant, her dark hair catching the light, her smile forgiving. But doubt crept in, as it always did. Would Clara see the love in every stitch? Or would she see only the years of absence, the fights, the silence? The phone rang, jarring her from her thoughts. It was Margaret, her neighbor and closest friend, her voice warm but urgent. Ellie, you've got to come to the community center tonight. They're planning the wedding decorations. And Clara's fiancé, James, will be there. You should meet him. Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't seen Clara, yet only the letter. Only words on paper. Meeting James felt like stepping into her daughter's new world uninvited. But Margaret's insistence won out. I'll drive you, she said. You can't hide forever. That evening, Eleanor stood outside the community center, her coat pulled tight against the autumn chill. Inside, voices buzzed, and fairy lights twinkled through the windows. She clutched a swatch of the dress's fabric in her pocket, a talisman of her purpose. When she stepped inside, she saw him, James, tall and broad-shouldered, his laugh easy as he spoke with a group of volunteers. He had kind eyes, Eleanor thought, but there was something else, a flicker of sharpness when he turned away. Margaret introduced them, and James shook her hand warmly. Clara's told me so much about you, he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Eleanor nodded, unsure what Clara had shared. The good years. The bad ones. She wanted to ask about her daughter, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she listened as James talked about the wedding, his voice polished, his plans grand. Clara deserves the best, he said, and Eleanor clung to that, hoping it was true. As the evening wore on, Eleanor lingered near the back, watching. James moved through the room with confidence, charming everyone. But she noticed how he deflected questions about Clara's absence. She's busy with work, he said, waving a hand. Eleanor's unease grew, a quiet gnawing she couldn't name. She slipped outside for air, the swatch of fabric still in her hand, soft and grounding. That's when she overheard it. Two voices, low and conspiratorial, near the side of the building. She recognized James's voice instantly. "Just do it at the reception," he said. "Throw wine on it. Pretend it's an accident. She'll be humiliated, and I'll handle the rest." Eleanor froze, her heart pounding. The dress. Her dress. The one she'd poured her soul into. She didn't know who he was speaking to or why, but the words cut like a blade. She pressed herself against the wall, hidden in the shadows, as the second voice of a woman's unfamiliar laughed softly. "You're ruthless, James." The world tilted. Eleanor's hands shook as she clutched the fabric swatch, its softness now a mockery. Why would he want to ruin Clara's day? What kind of man was her daughter marrying? And what did this mean for the fragile thread connecting her to Clara? She stumbled back to Margaret's car, her mind a storm of questions, her heart heavy with betrayal she didn't yet understand. When she got home, Eleanor sat at her sewing machine, staring at the dress. It was beautiful, perfect, a testament to her love. But now it felt like a target, a canvas for someone else's cruelty. She didn't know James's plan, but she knew one thing. She wouldn't let him destroy what she'd built for her daughter. Not the dress, not their chance at reconciliation. She picked up her needle, her hand steadier now, fueled by a new resolve. She would finish the dress. She would go to the wedding. And she would protect Clara, no matter the cost. Eleanor woke the next morning with the weight of James's words still pressing against her chest. The cottage was quiet, save for the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. She brewed coffee, her movements mechanical, but her mind churned. The dress lay draped over a mannequin in the corner, its silk catching the dawn light, mocking her with its beauty. She wanted to believe she'd misheard, that James's words were a mistake. But the cold certainty in his voice lingered like a bruise. She sat at her work table, staring at the delicate roses she'd embroidered along the hem. Each one had taken hours, her fingers pricking with the needle, her eyes straining in the dim light. She'd imagined Clara's joy, the way the dress would make her feel cherished. Now, she pictured wine staining the fabric, spreading like blood, and James's smug satisfaction. Who was the woman he'd spoken to? What did they gain from humiliating Clara? Eleanor's hands clenched, her nails digging into her palms. She needed answers. But first, she needed to finish the dress. It was her only connection to Clara, her only way forward. The phone rang, startling her. It was Margaret, her voice bright but cautious. "Ellie, you seemed off last night. Everything okay?" Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't told Margaret what she'd overheard. She wasn't sure she could trust anyone yet. "Just tired," she said, forcing a smile into her voice. "The dress is keeping me up late." Margaret didn't press, but she invited Eleanor to a craft circle at the community center that afternoon. "It'll do you good to get out," she said. Eleanor agreed, though her heart wasn't in it. She needed to see James again, to watch him, to understand. She packed a small sewing kit and the dress's veil, still unfinished, to work on during the circle. It was an excuse to keep her hands busy while her mind searched for clues. At the community center, the craft circle was a small group of women, their chatter filling the room with warmth. Eleanor sat quietly, stitching pearls onto the veil, her eyes scanning the space. James wasn't there, but she recognized a young woman from the night before Lila, a florist helping with the wedding. Lila was in her late 20s, with sharp features and a laugh that cut through the room. Eleanor watched her closely, noting how she deflected questions about the wedding with practiced ease, much like James had. During a break, Eleanor approached Lila, her heart pounding. "You're doing the flowers for Clara's wedding, aren't you?" she asked, keeping her voice light. Lila nodded. her smile tight. Claire is lucky to have such a beautiful day planned, Eleanor added, watching for a reaction. Lila's eyes flickered, but she only said, "It'll be perfect." The word felt hollow, and Eleanor's unease deepened. Was Lila the woman she'd heard last night? She couldn't be sure, but something in Lila's guarded demeanor set her nerves on edge. Back home, Eleanor spread the dress across her work table, checking every seam, every stitch. It was flawless, a labor of love, but now it felt like a shield she wasn't sure how to wield. She thought of Clara, wondering what her daughter knew about James. Had she sensed his sharpness, his secrets? Eleanor wanted to call her, to warn her, but the years of silence held her back. What right did she have to interfere when Clara had only just reached out? That evening, she found herself digging through old boxes in the attic, searching for traces of Clara's life before she left. She found a journal, its pages yellowed, filled with Clara's teenage scrawl. The entries were angry, full of Hurt Eleanor's strictness, Thomas's death, the weight of their small-town life. One line stood out, "I just want to be free." Eleanor's chest tightened. She'd thought she was protecting Clara, but maybe she'd suffocated her instead. The dress, she realized, wasn't just an apology, it was a plea for forgiveness. As she closed the journal, her resolve hardened. She couldn't change the past, but she could protect Clara's future. She needed to know more about James, about his plan, about the woman he'd spoken to. She called Margaret, her voice steady now. "Can you get me into the wedding rehearsal? I need to see Clara." Margaret hesitated, then agreed, promising to pull some strings. Eleanor returned to the dress, her needle moving with purpose. She added a hidden pocket to the bodice, small but sturdy, a place for Clara to keep something safe, a note, perhaps, or a truth Eleanor hadn't yet uncovered. The dress was no longer just a gift. It was a weapon, a way to stand between her daughter and whatever James had planned. As the needle pierced the fabric, Eleanor felt a spark of defiance. She would finish this dress. She would go to the wedding. And she would unravel James's secret, stitch by stitch. The days blurred as Eleanor worked on the dress, her fingers moving faster now, driven by urgency. The wedding was 2 weeks away, and the rehearsal was tomorrow. She hadn't slept properly in days, her mind caught in a loop of James's words. "Throw wine on it. Pretend it's an accident." She'd begun to piece together possibilities: jealousy, revenge, some cruel prank, but none made sense without knowing more about James and Clara's life together. Eleanor needed to see her daughter, to look into her eyes and gauge what she knew. The rehearsal was held at a small church on the edge of Willow Creek, its steeple framed against a graying sky. Eleanor arrived early, the dress's veil folded carefully in her bag, a pretext for her presence. Margaret had arranged for her to help with decorations, and Eleanor busied herself arranging flowers, her eyes scanning the arriving guests. When Clara walked in, Eleanor's breath caught. Her daughter was taller than she remembered, her dark hair pulled back, her face a mix of exhaustion and guarded hope. She looked like Thomas, stubborn, proud, but with a softness Eleanor hadn't seen in years. Clara didn't notice her at first, too busy greeting the wedding party. James was at her side, his arm around her waist, his smile polished. Eleanor watched them, her heart twisting. Clara seemed happy, but there was a tension in her posture, a hesitation when James spoke for her. Eleanor wanted to run to her, to ask everything, but she held back, her hands trembling as she adjusted a bouquet. When Clara finally saw her, her eyes widened. "Mama," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and uncertainty. Eleanor stepped forward, clutching the veil. "I brought this," she said, holding it out. For the dress. Clara's face softened. And for a moment, Eleanor thought she saw tears. It's beautiful, Clara whispered, touching the pearls. They stood there, the air thick with unspoken words, until James interrupted, his voice smooth. Eleanor, so good to see you again. Eleanor nodded, her eyes locked on his. She searched for a crack in his facade, but he was impenetrable, his charm a wall. The rehearsal began, and Eleanor stayed on the sidelines, watching. Lila was there, arranging flowers, her movements brisk. Eleanor noticed how she glanced at James. A quick, knowing look that made her stomach turn. Was Lila part of the plan? Or was Eleanor imagining enemies where there were none? After the rehearsal, Clara approached her. Alone. Mama, I'm glad you're here, she said, her voice low. I wasn't sure you'd come. Eleanor's throat tightened. I wouldn't miss it, she said. She wanted to say more, to warn her. But James called Clara back, and the moment slipped away. Eleanor left the church with a heavy heart, the veil still in her bag, unfinished. She needed more time, more answers. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at her sewing machine, working on the dress's final to chase a delicate sash, a row of buttons down the back. Each stitch felt like a step toward Clara, but also toward a truth she wasn't sure she could face. She thought of the journal, of Clara's need for freedom. Had James given her that? Or had he trapped her in a different way? Eleanor's mind raced, piecing together fragments, James's charm, Lila's glances, the whispered plan. The next morning, she called Margaret, asking about James's background. Margaret, ever the town gossip, shared what she knew. James was new to Willow Creek, a businessman with a vague past, successful but private. Some say he's too good to be true, Margaret added, her tone light but pointed. Eleanor's suspicion grew. She needed to know more, but she couldn't risk alienating Clara now, not when they were so close to rebuilding. She decided to attend the next wedding planning meeting, hoping to catch James or Lila off guard. The dress was nearly complete, a masterpiece of silk and love. But Eleanor knew it was more than that now. It was a symbol of her fight, a way to protect her daughter from whatever James had planned. As she sewed the final button, she whispered a promise to herself. She would uncover the truth, and she would keep Clara safe, no matter what it took. Eleanor's cottage felt smaller each day, as if the walls were closing in with her questions. The dress hung on the mannequin, complete now, its ivory silk glowing in the morning light. She traced the embroidered roses, her fingers lingering on the hidden pocket she'd sewn into the bodice. It was empty, but it felt like a secret waiting to be filled a note. A warning, a truth. She hadn't decided yet. The wedding was 10 days away, and time was slipping through her fingers like thread. The next planning meeting was at the community center, a flurry of activity with caterers, musicians, and volunteers. Eleanor arrived early, her eyes sharp, her sewing kit in her bag as a cover. She spotted Lila first, arranging centerpieces with a practiced smile. James was across the room, talking to a man Eleanor didn't recognize, a photographer. She guessed, from the camera slung around his neck. She watched James's gestures, the way he leaned in, his voice low. It reminded her of the night she'd overheard him, and her pulse quickened. She approached Lila, offering to help with the flowers. They're lovely, Eleanor said, keeping her tone warm. You must know Clara well to choose her favorites. Lila's smile faltered, just for a moment. Oh, James picked them, she said, her voice clipped. Eleanor noted the deflection, filing it away. She needed to get closer to Lila, to understand her role. Was she an accomplice, a pawn, or something else entirely? As the meeting went on, Eleanor stayed close to Lila, helping with small tasks, listening. Lila was guarded, but she let slip small details. She'd known James for years, before he moved to Willow Creek. He's always been ambitious, she said, her tone neutral but her eyes distant. Eleanor's mind raced. Ambition could mean anything: success, control, betrayal. She needed more. When James joined them, his charm was on full display. "Eleanor, you're a lifesaver," he said, gesturing to the flowers. "Clara's lucky to have you." The words felt hollow, and Eleanor forced a smile. She noticed how Lila stiffened at his approach, her fingers tightening around a stem. There was tension there, subtle but undeniable. Eleanor's suspicion deepened. Lila wasn't just a bystander. That evening, Eleanor sat at her work table, staring at the dress. She'd added a final touch delicate lace trim along the neckline, a nod to the dress Clara had worn as a child. Memories flooded back, Clara twirling in the backyard, laughing, before the arguments began, before Thomas's death fractured their family. Eleanor wondered if Clara still carried that hurt, if James had preyed on it. She decided to take a risk. She called Clara, her hands shaking as she dialed. When Clara answered, her voice was soft but cautious. "Mama, is everything okay?" Eleanor hesitated, then said, "I just wanted to hear your voice. The dress is ready. I hope you'll love it." Clara's pause was long, heavy. "I know it'll be perfect," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry for everything." Eleanor's heart ached, but she couldn't bring herself to mention James. Not yet. Instead, she asked about the wedding, probing gently. Clara spoke of James with warmth, but there was a strain in her voice, a hesitation Eleanor recognized from her own years of doubt. "He's good to me," Clara said, but it sounded like a reassurance, not a truth. After the call, Eleanor felt more determined than ever. She needed evidence, something concrete to confront James or warn Clara. She remembered the photographer from the meeting. Maybe he'd seen something, heard something. She called Margaret, asking for his name. "That's Paul," Margaret said. "Nice guy, but he keeps to himself." "Why?" Eleanor brushed it off, but she made a plan to find Paul. He might hold a piece of the puzzle. As she lay in bed that night, the dress glowed faintly in the moonlight, a beacon of her love and her fear. She thought of James's words, of Lila's guarded glances, of Clara's strained voice. The pieces were there, but they didn't fit yet. Eleanor closed her eyes, her resolve steeling. She would protect her daughter, even if it meant unraveling everything Clara believed in. The dress was ready, but the fight was just beginning. Eleanor woke to a gray morning, the air heavy with the promise of rain. The dress hung in her workroom, a silent witness to her sleepless nights. She'd spent hours replaying James's words, Lila's glances, Clara's hesitant voice. The wedding was a week away, and Eleanor felt time pressing against her like a tightening seam. She needed to act, to find the truth before it was too late. She started with Paul, the photographer. Margaret had given her his contact information, and Eleanor called him, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm Clara's mother," she said. "I'd like to talk about the wedding photos." Paul agreed to meet at a cafe in town, his tone polite but reserved. Eleanor brought a sketch of the dress, claiming it was for photo planning, but her real goal was to probe for information. At the cafe, Paul was quiet, his eyes scanning the room as if expecting someone. He was in his 40s, with a tired face and hands that fidgeted with his coffee cup. Eleanor showed him the sketch, talking about lighting and angles. But she watched his reactions closely. When she mentioned James, Paul's expression tightened. He's particular about the photos, Paul said, his voice low. Wants everything perfect. Eleanor leaned in, sensing an opening. He seems very in control, she said carefully. Paul hesitated, then nodded. He's got a vision, he said, but there was an edge to his words. Eleanor pressed further, asking about Lila. Paul's eyes flickered. She's always around him, he said. They go way back. Not sure Clara knows how far. The words hit Eleanor like a needle's prick. She thanked Paul and left, her mind racing. Lila and James had a history, something Clara might not know. Was the wine plot a personal vendetta? A way to hurt Clara for reasons Eleanor couldn't yet see. She needed to talk to Lila, to confront her directly. But she had to be careful. One wrong move could push Clara away forever. That afternoon, Eleanor went to the florist shop where Lila worked. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, the air thick with the scent of roses and lilies. Lila was behind the counter, arranging a bouquet, her movements precise. When she saw Eleanor, her smile was tight. Mrs. Grayson, she said, here for wedding flowers. Eleanor nodded, playing along. I wanted to see your work, she said. Clara's lucky to have you. Lila's eyes narrowed slightly, but she led Eleanor to a display of arrangements. As they talked, Eleanor steered the conversation to James, watching for cracks. He's so charming, she said. You've known him a long time, haven't you? Lila's hands paused, a rose stem snapping in her grip. A while, she said, her voice flat. Eleanor pushed gently. It must be special, seeing him marry Clara. Lila's smile was brittle. Yeah, special, she said, turning away. The air between them crackled with unspoken truths, and Eleanor knew she'd struck a nerve. Lila was hiding something, maybe jealousy, maybe loyalty to James. Back home, Eleanor sat at her sewing machine, though the dress was finished. She ran her fingers over the hidden pocket, imagining slipping a note to Clara, a warning about James. But what could she say without proof? She needed something solid, something Clara couldn't dismiss. She thought of Paul's words, of Lila's reaction, and a plan began to form. She would go to the wedding, deliver the dress, and watch James and Lila closely. If they made a move, she'd be ready. That night, she dreamed of Clara as a child, twirling in a dress, laughing. But the dream shifted, wine spilled across the fabric, Clara's face crumpling in shame. Eleanor woke with a start, her heart pounding. She went to the dress, touching its silk, its roses, its hidden pocket. It was more than a dress, no, it was her armor, her way to fight for her daughter. She would find the truth, and she would protect Clara, even if it meant breaking her heart to save her. The wedding was 3 days away, and Eleanor's cottage was a fortress of resolve. The dress hung in a protective cover, its silk pristine, its hidden pocket a silent promise. She'd spent the morning packing it carefully, folding tissue paper between the layers to preserve its shape. But her mind wasn't on the dress, it was on James, Lila, and the plan she'd overheard. She needed evidence, something to show Clara before the wine could spill. Eleanor decided to visit the community center one last time, hoping to catch James or Lila off guard. The space was chaotic, volunteers stringing lights and arranging chairs for the reception. She spotted James near the stage, talking to a caterer, his gestures sharp. Lila was across the room, adjusting a floral arch, her eyes darting to James every few seconds. Eleanor's pulse quickened. The connection between them was palpable, a thread she needed to pull. She approached James first, her sewing kit in hand as an excuse. "I wanted to check the lighting for the dress," she said, forcing a smile. James nodded, his charm effortless. "Clara's going to look stunning," he said, but his eyes were cold, calculating. Eleanor mentioned Lila casually, watching his reaction. "She's done wonders with the flowers," she said. James's smile tightened, just for a moment. "She's the best," he said, then excused himself. Eleanor moved to Lila next, offering to help with the arch. As they worked, she probed gently. "You and James seem close," she said, keeping her tone light. Lila's hands froze, a petal falling to the floor. "We're just friends," she said, too quickly. Eleanor nodded, but her mind cataloged the lie. She needed something concrete, a conversation, a document, anything to prove their plan. That evening, Eleanor called Paul again, asking to meet. He agreed, reluctant but curious. At the cafe, she got straight to the point. "I heard something about James," she said, her voice low. "A plan to ruin Clara's dress. Do you know anything?" Paul's face paled, his fingers tightening around his cup. "I don't get involved," he said, but his eyes betrayed him. "Just be careful. James doesn't like loose ends." The warning sent a chill through Eleanor. She thanked Paul and left, her mind racing. Back home, she sat at her work table, staring at the dress. She couldn't confront James directly, not without proof. But she could prepare. She slipped a small notebook into the dress's hidden pocket, along with a pen. If she couldn't warn Clara before the wedding, she'd find a way during it. The next day, she delivered the dress to Clara's hotel room. Clara opened the door, her face lighting up at the sight of the garment bag. "Mama, it's perfect," she said, tears in her eyes as she unzipped it. Eleanor watched her daughter trace the roses, her heart aching. "I made it for you," she said, her voice thick. Clara hugged her, a brief, fierce embrace that felt like a lifeline. But James was in the next room, his voice carrying through the door, and Eleanor's resolve hardened. She left the hotel with a plan. She'd attend the wedding, stay close to Clara, and watch James and Lila. If they tried to ruin the dress, she'd intervene. If she found proof of their plan, she'd give it to Clara, no matter the cost. The dress was her gift, her apology, her shield. She wouldn't let James destroy either her daughter. That night, Eleanor lay awake, the cottage silent except for the clock's ticking. She thought of Clara's hug, of the years they'd lost, of the love she'd sewn into every stitch. She thought of James's cold eyes, Lila's lies, Paul's warning. The truth was close. She could feel it, but it was sharp, dangerous. She closed her eyes, whispering a prayer for strength. The wedding was tomorrow, and she was ready to fight. The wedding day dawned bright and crisp, the sky a clear blue over Willow Creek. Eleanor stood in her cottage, dressed in a simple navy dress, her hands trembling as she pinned a corsage to her lapel. The dress for Clara was already at the church, delivered to the bridal suite with a note, "For my daughter, with all my love." Inside the hidden pocket, she'd tucked the notebook and pen, a silent safeguard. She didn't know what she'd face today, but she was ready. At the church, the air buzzed with anticipation. Guests filled the pews, their voices a soft hum under the organ's melody. Eleanor slipped into the bridal suite, where Clara stood in front of a mirror, the dress glowing against her skin. She looked radiant, but her eyes held a shadow of doubt. "Mama," she said, turning. "Thank you. It's more than I could have dreamed." Eleanor's throat tightened. She wanted to warn her, to spill everything. But Clara's smile stopped her. Not yet. The ceremony began, and Eleanor sat near the front, her eyes on James. He stood at the altar, his smile perfect. But she saw the calculation in his posture. Lila was in the back, adjusting flowers, her movements tense. Eleanor's heart pounded as Clara walked down the aisle, the dress flowing like a dream. The guests gasped, and Eleanor felt a surge of pride, but it was tinged with fear. The wine, the plan, she couldn't let it happen. The vows were spoken, and Clara's voice trembled with emotion. James's was steady, too steady, and Eleanor's unease grew. After the ceremony, the reception began in the church hall, fairy lights twinkling overhead. Eleanor stayed close to Clara, watching for any sign of trouble. She saw Lila near the bar, pouring wine, her eyes darting to James. Eleanor's pulse raced. Was this it? She moved closer, pretending to adjust Clara's train. You look beautiful, she whispered, slipping the notebook from the pocket into Clara's hand. Keep this close. Clara frowned, confused, but nodded. Before Eleanor could say more, a guest bumped into Lila, and a glass of red wine tipped toward Clara. Eleanor reacted instinctively, stepping between them, the wine splashing across her own dress instead. The room gasped, and Lila's face flushed with panic. James was at Clara's side in an instant, his voice loud with concern. Oh, Clara, are you okay? But Eleanor saw the flicker of frustration in his eyes. The plan had failed. She met Lila's gaze, and the younger woman looked away, her hands shaking. Eleanor knew then Lila was the one meant to spill the wine. But why? What did James gain? Clara clutched the notebook, her face pale. Mama, what's going on? She whispered. Eleanor took her hand, leading her to a quiet corner. I heard something, she said, her voice low. James and Lila, they planned to ruin your dress, to humiliate you. I don't know why, but you need to be careful. Clara's eyes widened, hurt and disbelief warring in her expression. That can't be true, she said, but her voice wavered. Before Eleanor could say more, James approached, his smile tight. Everything okay? He asked. Eleanor stood tall, her eyes locked on his. Just a mother's worry, she said, her tone steady. James nodded, but his jaw clenched. Eleanor knew she'd rattled him. She guided Clara back to the reception, her mind racing. The truth was close, but she needed proof to make Clara believe her. The notebook was her last hopey way for Clara to question, to see. As the night wore on, Eleanor watched James and Lila, their glances sharp with unspoken tension. She knew the fight wasn't over. The dress was safe, but Clara's heart was still at risk. Eleanor would stay vigilant, ready to protect her daughter, no matter what came next. The reception pulsed with music and laughter, but Eleanor felt like she was walking a tightrope. Clara stood by the dance floor, the dress untouched, her smile faltering as she clutched the notebook Eleanor had given her. Eleanor stayed close, her eyes tracking James and Lila. The spilled wine had been a close call, but it wasn't the end. She knew James wouldn't stop not when his plan had failed so publicly. Eleanor approached the bar, where Lila was rearranging glasses, her movements jerky. That was quite a spill, Eleanor said, her voice calm but pointed. Lila's eyes flicked up, fear flashing across her face. It was an accident, she said, too quickly. Eleanor leaned closer. I heard you and James. I know it wasn't. Lila's face paled, and she turned away, but Eleanor caught her arm. Why? She asked. What does he want? Lila pulled free, her voice low. You don't understand. It's not what you think. But she wouldn't meet Eleanor's eyes. Before Eleanor could press further, Clara appeared, her face a mix of confusion and hurt. Mama, what's going on? She asked, holding up the notebook. Eleanor took a breath, knowing this was her moment. Clara, I overheard James planning to ruin your dress, to humiliate you. I think Lila's involved. I don't know why, but you need to talk to him. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, her jaw set. She marched toward James, who was laughing with guests, his charm a mask. Eleanor followed, her heart pounding. Clara pulled him aside, her voice low but fierce. Did you plan to ruin my dress? She asked, holding up the notebook. James's smile froze, his eyes darting to Lila, then back to Clara. What are you talking about? He said, but his voice cracked. Clara pressed, her voice rising. Tell me the truth. James. The room quieted, guests turning to watch. James's face hardened, and he grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her toward a corner. Eleanor stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Clara shook him off. Don't touch me, she said. Explain. James's mask slipped, his voice low and cold. You were always so perfect. Clara. Too perfect. I wanted to bring you down a notch. Make you need me. Eleanor's blood ran cold. It was about control, about breaking Clara's spirit. Lila stepped forward, her voice trembling. I didn't want to. Clara. He made me. Clara's face crumpled, but she stood tall, the dress glowing around her. Get out, she said to James, her voice steady. We're done. James's jaw clenched, but he turned and left, Lila following, her head bowed. The guests whispered, but Clara didn't falter. She turned to Eleanor, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Mama, she whispered, falling into her arms. Eleanor held her daughter, the dress soft between them, its stitches a testament to her love. They stayed like that for a long time, the music fading, the guests drifting away. Later, Clara kept the dress on, refusing to let James's cruelty taint it. She danced with Eleanor, a slow, healing dance, their steps tentative but growing stronger. In the days that followed, Clara stayed in Willow Creek, moving into the cottage with Eleanor. They talked, cried, laughed, rebuilding what had been broken. The dress hung in Eleanor's workroom, a symbol of their bond. Its hidden pocket empty now, its purpose fulfilled. Eleanor knew the scars would remain, but so would their love, stitched together by time and truth. And as she watched Clara smile again, Eleanor felt a quiet victory. She'd protected her daughter, not just from James, but from the silence that had kept them apart. The dress had been her weapon, her apology, her promise, and it had carried them home.